Hello, it's Jorbs. A lot of people have expressed confusion about whether I like Balatro or not, and I wanted to explain why I am so frustrated by the game. In terms of the strategic elements of the game, there are other parts of the game that I like or dislike, but I just want to engage with the strategy because my channel is largely about strategy games, and my viewers are largely interested in the strategy of games, I think. So this presentation is on the top 3 mistakes people make playing Balatro, or how to think more good about Mega Buffoons. And we're going to get into how I think about this game. Mistake number 1. I don't know why there was a 2 there. I mean, I do. I pressed enter, but it shouldn't have been there. Mistake number 1, I've heard a lot of people say that Balatro is just about playing the highest scoring hand every time. And this is kind of, to me, I think the most frustrating thing about Balatro. There's a very complex, intricate, and engaging game, which is a few steps past the idea that you should play the highest scoring hand every time. But I do feel like the game is built around the idea that people are just going to play the hand which makes the number big. And because it's built around that idea, the game's a lot worse than it could be. So, Balatro actually has a huge number of variables to consider when trying to decide which hand to play. The decision making here is, in fact, intractably complex. And what intractably means is basically unsolvably, like the math is too big to do. Even with computer processing power and years of time, it would be impossible to solve this question for every different time it might appear in the game. You just cannot make a solution for Balatro which says, in every situation, this is what you should do. The game is way too big. The solution would require more space than the number of atoms in the universe to store on a hard drive. You can shuffle a deck of 60 cards a very, very, very large number of ways. 60 factorial is 8.32 e plus 81, according to Google Calculator, whatever that means. And that's just what you're dealing with like shuffling the deck one time. You can also consider that, like, in Balatro, the decks can be lots of different things. You can add mult to cards, you can add or subtract cards from the deck. The deck is technically starting at 52 cards, but, you know, whatever. You can have cards in hand, cards in the deck, cards in your discard pile. All of these things add to complexity of the number of states that the game can be in. You can have different amounts of money. You can have different jokers with different values on them. The number of states that the game can be in is tremendous. And the idea of not just storing all of the possible states the game could be in, but also creating a solution which pointed from one state to the next and said you should make this choice. From this state, you should play this hand, which will lead to that state. That's kind of mind-blowing to consider. It would be very, 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 very large body of information which did that for you. Consider that when you play a hand, like when you draw your first 7-card hand from your 52 cards and you play 5 cards, there are 47 cards left in your draw pile, and you're going to draw 5 of them. And so from your first state where you draw those 7 cards, and then the solution that you have is going to say play these 5, and then give you arrows to which state you're going to next, so you understand what will happen there. It doesn't know which state you're going to go to next because you are drawing 5 cards out of 45 cards. 45 choose 5 happens to be 1,221,759. And so it's going to have 1,221,759 arrows branching out from your decision for which hand to play to take you to the states which you could be in next, where it will try to tell you which thing you should do next. So it's really hard to it's really hard to even conceptualize how big that solution would have to be to to get to a point where a computer could tell it to you. And the idea of a human player doing that, like sitting down for turn one of the game, looking at their hand and being like, oh, obviously I should do this thing. And then like their brain is churning through the 1,221,759 possible consequences that could happen just from playing that hand. Consider that likely in the first fight you might play like 3 or 4 hands, and so that's going to branch. Like then you're going to have 40 choose 5. So after your 1.2 million possible second hands, every single one of those is going to go to 650,000 other hands. And then you might have another hand, and then you can discard cards too. Like this is really hard. This is math with complexity to a point where humans aren't going to be able to just work this out on the fly. And we can get to a point where we can solve that for like the starter deck for the starter fight most of the time. Like you can have good heuristics, like you should try to play a queen high straight because a jack high straight isn't quite enough points to beat the blind in one go, for example. Simple, easy to create, sure. But Balatro also has jokers, and it also has card modifications, and it also has like economy considerations. And so by the time that you're at ante 3 or 4, you will quite likely be in a run of Balatro, which is not identical to any other run of Balatro that's ever been played in the history of the world. And your heuristics that you have may or may not work there anymore, and you're kind of on your own. And cool. The point of all this is I want to be there. Take me into that forest and get me lost. That's a cool strategy game. But to even begin to start to grapple with the idea that you're going there, you have to step away from this idea that you should just play the highest scoring hand. That's just nonsense. That just doesn't make sense. So to try to, like, having given you the view from a long way away, I'll try to give you the view from very up close and just give you an example hand. Suppose on turn 1 of the run, this is just like with a regular deck. Suppose you have Ace of Spades, Ace of Clubs, King of Spades, King of Diamonds, 9 of Spades, 5 of Spades, 3 of Diamonds, 2 of Hearts. I think most people who have played a bit of Balatro would look at that and pretty quickly recognize that the highest scoring hand that you can play here is 2-pair with aces and kings, right? So that's pretty straightforward, I would say. And I see a lot of people saying, like, well, that's the game. You worked it out, so play the 2-pair, aces and kings. But that isn't the game. Because this hand also is very close to having a spade flush in it. And it's very close to having a straight in it. And it's very close to having a full house in it. And it's not super close, but it is, like, within possibility of having 4 of a kind in it. And depending on which situation you were in exactly, I said we were on turn 1 of the run, so we're looking for 300 points. I'm pretty sure that, let's see. So, so I believe the 6, 7, 8, or 10, 6, 7, 8, 10, Jack, or Queen of Spades makes you a flush that is high enough to win the fight in one hand. But the 4 of Spades, 3 of Spades, and 2 of Spades, I'm pretty sure it doesn't. And the reason that I'm relatively confident of that off the top of the head is that I have at this point spent almost 100 hours playing runs of Balatro where I have to do the mental math to work this shit out because the game just, like, doesn't have good support to help me do that without me having to do it all on my own. So, like, that's in my head now, and I had to spend a lot of time playing Balatro putting that in my head because the game doesn't have a calculator, and I kind of hate that. We could also hit a straight. Ace 2, 3, 4, 5 is a straight here, but I happen to know at this point that that wouldn't be enough to make 300 points. Making 300 points is important here because if we win the fight, without having to use more than one hand, we make the maximum gold possible because we get gold for every hand that we have remaining. We can also draw toward a full house. Either of the full houses, aces full of kings or kings full of aces, would be enough for beating the fight in one hand, and we can, I guess, draw to 4 of a kind, although it's less likely. We can also draw to 3 of a kind. I didn't even bother mentioning 3 of a kind because in my brain I happen to know at this point that 3 of a kind isn't really making many more points than 2 of a kind, or 2 pair. So given all of that, what hand to actually play is actually pretty complicated. I think that probably the line I would take here would be to discard everything that wasn't a spade. With 2 discards at max difficulty, that's going to give me a high enough spade flush to win the fight in one hand a pretty high percentage of the time. And that kind of stuff is the math that I'm actually interested in doing. It is actually interesting to me to get into the idea of doing math like, okay, so I'm going to draw 8 cards, discarding 4 here and then 4 again with 2 discards to try to win the fight in one hand. What's my chance of actually hitting 6, 7, 8, 10, jack, queen of spades? 6 outs, drawing 8 cards. 45, choose 8. Looks like there are 215 million ways to draw 8 cards from 45 cards, but we can consider how many ways there are to draw only the cards which are misses. So that would be 37, choose 8. So 215 million total ways, and only 38.6 million of them miss. So that means that like 5/6-ish of the time, loose math, 4/5, 5/6, somewhere in between there, I believe, I would be able to hit my flush here, and I would be able to win the fight in one hand. However, what if I miss the flush? Because the intractability keeps going. How big a deal is it for me to miss the flush? If I discard 4 cards and then 4 cards again, how often am I just like going to find a better hand? Like maybe I work my way into hitting a full house accidentally, or 3 of a kind, or 4 of a kind, or maybe I end up hitting queen jack 10 for a straight, and that straight is high enough to win the fight in one hand. Maybe I hit like trip 8 and I get to play those, so I can still win the fight in 2 hands or 3 hands reasonably. Maybe I just end up with like ace spades, king spades, 9 spades, 5 spades, the 4 cards that I kept, and then the other cards are like 7, 6, 4, 2 of clubs and hearts, and my hand is just completely broken and can't do anything. Do I die there? How big of a deal is it if I die here? Does like perhaps a 4 or 3% chance, I don't know, something like that, of dying here, maybe lower, probably lower, does that chance of dying here outweigh the value of going for +1 gold all of the times that I survive? I would guess it doesn't, based on how successful I tend to be at high difficulty in the game, but it's hard to say. This is really hard. And it's a really complex and interesting and inviting game to me. And the game's choice to not show me how much my hands are making, like how many points I make if I make different hands. And then when I do play a hand, it like makes flashing lights and the number goes up and there are flames and stuff, and I have to like sit and watch that. That is a choice to take me away from playing this game. This game's really good. It's actually, it's really good. It's incredibly compelling. I don't understand why the game doesn't do a better job of supporting me playing it. And yeah, I wanted, first of all, to introduce you all to this game. I had slides here, but I guess I didn't really talk through them very well. This is a good one. What's the easy solution then? There isn't one. There isn't an easy solution. There isn't something you can do that's like as easy as just play the highest hand or play a lower hand if you want to scale your rook. It just isn't that easy. I've had plenty of runs at this point where there are particular cards in my deck which are tremendously important. And so the fight is about like, how do I maximize the chance that I get to play my gold seal 9 of diamonds so that I can make 3 gold, for example. Or I want to play as many deuces as possible without dying, so that I can scale my joker, which gets more points for the rest of the run every time that I score a deuce. How am I going to do that? Or there are fights where I have to recognize at the start of the fight, I am going to need to make specific hands in order to win. Like, I'm going to have to make 3 of a kind, 4 of a kind, and a full house to win this fight, one after the other. And I have to work out how I'm going to do that. And that stuff's really fun. That stuff is really fun, and the game's really hard. And yeah. This is why having to do manual point calculations feels so miserable. I just feel like I am wasting my time when I could be playing a very good video game. Okay. Number 2 mistake that I see people making and analyzing and trying to understand Balatro is not understanding the full value of fights. A lot of people express to me that they think I should be skipping blinds more than I am, or that like they skip blinds more than I do. And to me, the only explanation that makes sense for that is that people aren't considering how much stuff you get out of playing a fight. Because the reward for skipping the blind is succinctly explained to you. You get to double your gold, or you get a mega buffoon pack, or something like that. I don't know. There are lots of different possibilities. But exactly what you get out of playing a fight is a little bit more nebulous. And so, simplistically, I'm simplifying this a little bit. But simplistically, I would say that fights have 3 major value components. One is the money you get for winning them. You get money for beating the blinds, you get interest, you get money for how many hands you have remaining, you may get money from jokers that you have, or gold cards that you have in your deck, or lucky cards that you have in your deck may make money for you, etc. And like, just saying that, it should tickle your brain, and you should be thinking like, huh, so you want to get as much money as possible from the gold cards in your deck. Well, that's pretty complicated. How are you going to do that? What if you're in a fight where you need to score 12,000 points maybe, and you have a gold card in your hand, and it can be used to make a moderately good scoring hand, but that doesn't immediately win you the fight, and it would mean that you don't have your gold card in your hand. Should you hold the gold card in your hand? Should you discard the gold card looking for a really good hand instead of playing the moderately good hand? Or should you like play a worse hand and hold the gold card and try to get a high scoring hand later to make the most of the gold card? I don't know. I don't know what the answer to that is. That's the game, in my opinion. That's what the game should be for the game to be interesting at high difficulty. And if you are playing the game and not finding that that's what the game is, to me that implies that the game hasn't been like structured very well in its user interface to show you what's important. Yeah. Number 2 value from fights is that you get to utilize all of the scaling components of your cards and jokers. So many jokers gain permanent value when you fulfill some sort of condition during a fight, like playing a hand or making a straight. What else? Discarding a king, discarding a heart. There are lots of different like kind of side quests that you might have throughout a fight, and if you can maximize those side quests, you can get as much value as possible out of the fight. And then also cards can have side quests on them. I already talked about gold cards. There are also cards with purple seals, which will create tarot cards for you if you discard them. There are cards with blue seals. If you hold those in hand at the end of the fight, they'll make a celestial card for you, which may have good value. There are probably some others. I don't even know. There's Hiker, which makes it so your cards get more points on them every time that you play them for the rest of the run whenever you play them. Hiker is a joker, and that's confusing and also very poorly supported by the UI. And then number 3, you also get to see a store after them. If you skip the blind, you also don't get the store after the blind, and that is a massive deal, like a really big deal. I think that it is hard to overstate how important it is to see as many stores as possible in a run of Balatro. because you need to get things out of stores to win the game, and you have no guarantee that any particular store will have those things. And so as you get better and better at recognizing which things are good to buy in stores and which things are not good to buy in stores, it becomes more and more and more important to see as many stores as you can so that you can buy the things which are important to buy, because you're not going to see them if you don't see enough stores to actually find those. Yeah, so the takeaway here is be very hesitant about skipping blinds when playing Balatro, and try to engage with the fights and try to understand how you can get as much as possible out of every fight that you play. Number 3 thing that I see people, I don't even know if this is a mistake, because this is just kind of a different way of thinking about the game, which isn't wrong. It isn't wrong to think that the game is about the broken things you can do in endless mode, but it's incompatible with thinking that the game is about trying to win each run with as high a probability as possible. And it's not to say that one of those is better than the other. I think Balatro does a good job of having an endless mode which is engaging to a lot of people. Like, it does a really good job. A lot of people are super engaged in trying to see how big they can make the number go in endless mode. And when somebody comes up with a broken strategy or gets a new personal best or what have you, a lot of people are really excited about it, including the person who did it. That's a really cool element of the game. But that being said, if you're trying to play runs of Balatro to win as often as possible, a lot of the stuff that you would do for a run of Balatro that went to endless mode becomes quite bad. A decent amount of the endless mode stuff in Balatro is kind of dependent on combining a number of different things together to create a really, really, really strong combo. But if you don't get those things put together, you just lose, kind of. The stuff that you have just isn't very good at that point. Whereas trying to win a run with as high a probability as possible is about like scrapping out incremental advantages and taking jokers which are good right now, even though they don't have tremendous scaling potential. You're just hoping that they'll keep you alive right now until you find something better. Or maybe they'll keep you alive right now and you will somehow work out some lucky way that you can win the final fight just off of these, and maybe it will only work 20% of the time, but the 20% of the time that it works, that's going to feel really good and really satisfying and really engaging to play, in my opinion. So that is the other thing. In my experience, there are lots of seeds where max difficulty runs are tremendously close and interesting all the way through if you're trying to just win the run. And in contrast, going for broken endless mode shenanigans, in my experience, runs will tend to either feel impossibly hard because you don't find the stuff that you need, or they're going to feel impossibly easy and just very boring because you have, completely broken the game. So those are kind of my strategic observations about how people are approaching Balatro. And yeah, a lot of people have expressed that watching me play Balatro, they can't tell if I'm actually having fun and enjoying the game or not. And the reason is, like, you're picking up on this tension. I see a tremendously beautiful, engaging, compelling, difficult, rewarding game when I play Balatro, which is hidden behind just a bunch of stuff that's really fucking frustrating. It's like being at a party that is awesome, and then the host says, "Everyone be quiet, I'm going to play Wonderwall for you." That is my vibe when I play Balatro. And yeah, my hope in making this video is to kind of like open eyes to how much stuff is going on in this game, because I want people to more and more ask for the game that I think is really good in Balatro to be provided to them when they play a game. I would like you to look at a game like Balatro and think, oh, it's really interesting to try to work out which cards I should and shouldn't play in my first hand, and whether I should discard or just play 2-pair or play high card for some reason, or go for a flush or go for trips or go for a full house. It's really interesting and complicated to try to work that out. And I would love it if the game's interface elements correctly respected that that's where I want my attention to be. I would love it if the interface elements perhaps showed me the chance of hitting certain things if I discard that many cards. So if I discarded 4 cards, I would love it if the deck said you will have a 32% chance of hitting a flush, a 16% chance of hitting a full house, etc. Like maybe that could be said on top of the deck as I'm hovering 4 cards to discard so that I know kind of what my chances are of hitting when I draw. I would love it if the game just said like, this is the highest point value hand that you can play right now, just so that I know what the highest point value hand I can play right now is. Maybe if that's all I want to do, I could just click the button to play it, straightforward. But also that could kind of like set an anchoring point for me to think like, okay, so that's how many points I'm working with here. Is that enough? Is it more than I need? So I could think about playing fewer cards. Is there a way to improve it drastically by drawing toward a different hand, etc.? I would love the game to do that. I just would love the game to place less emphasis on it being surprising how many points your hand scores. Like, it's honestly really well done, the little animation that makes flames when you make lots of points. It's genuinely really well done, but I already know how many points I'm going to make because I had to solve that to play the game before I played the hand. So it isn't actually exciting for me. What I would actually like the game to recognize as exciting is that when I play my hand, there are 12 million possible universes that I could live in next when I draw a new 5 cards, and I'm engaged in thinking about how many of those are good for me and how many of them are bad for me. And that's something that I genuinely don't know until I play the hand. So finding out which cards get drawn next is actually exciting and actually strategically compelling. And that's my thoughts on Balatro. Thanks for watching.